Well, and everybody's different. I mean, when you were a baby, I changed your diapers. I just can't get my head around you changing my diapers. I'm sorry.
So you don't want me to change your diapers?
Please.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm very glad we had this conversation. Welcome to Before the Buzzer Conversations, real talk about death, legacy, and what matters most.
I'm Keith, a retired physician.
And I'm Michelle, his daughter, a broadcasting professor.
I'm not dying yet.
Thank God. But even in health, we know death will come, and we need to talk about it.
You know, it's important for parents and their adult children to have those conversations, Michelle.
But it's not always easy to talk about, and that's where we come in.
In this podcast, we'll talk together about what needs to be done before you pass, and provide practical ways for you to have these conversations with people in your life.
This is not about doom and gloom. It's about living with purpose, passing on what matters most, and finding peace, even in the unknown.
So before the buzzer sounds, let's have a conversation.
Okay, I'm just going to say it. I'm a news junkie. I'm addicted to information. Do you think you are too, Dad?
I am, yes, I have to say. Maybe not to your level, but...
Well, it's part of my job as a broadcast journalist. And I always know what's going on. I have multiple news outlets that send me alerts throughout the day. I have news radio on in the car. My kids know we always turn on the news every night. I like to have information. So I feel like whenever something happens, I'm usually among the first to know in my circle.
But what is that quote you tell your students when you're teaching them about this, about a balanced diet?
Oh, yeah, balanced media diet. Yes, so you have to make sure you don't live in a vacuum and have a balance of, if you're on one side of a political spectrum, for example, you should also be consuming media from the other side so you can find the truth hidden in there somewhere. I look at news, there are a lot of really important economic and political news, but I also love some celebrity gossip, Dad. That's my balance, okay? My diversified media diet.
It's dessert.
It's dessert. And I love it. I am just going to admit it. I love good who's dating who and all these things. I feel like, too, whenever something happens with celebrities, I know. So I bet I was one of the first people in our family to know that an Oscar-winning actor died not that long ago, Gene Hackman, which is not too shocking. That's something that kind of bugs me about news alerts these days. Like, I'll get a breaking news alert that some 87-year-old opera singer died. I'm like, they're 87, like why is that breaking news? But Gene Hackman, he was in his 90s, so that wasn't too surprising that someone in their 90s has passed. It was the manner of death. And if you're not aware or if you've forgotten, he was found deceased in his home in New Mexico. His wife was also deceased, and she was about 30 years younger than him. Subsequently found out that she died of something kind of acute, not long-term. And she had been his primary caretaker, and nobody knew, but apparently he had advanced Alzheimer's. And so he lived in the home for a period of time after, when no one caring for him, and he didn't have the mental capacity to care for himself. And he passed as well. And it was a gardener or a landscaper or a caregiver of it was some kind of not a family member, but someone really removed from them that ended up finding their bodies. And that is very sad, and a lot of conversation happened online and about who's watching for the caregiver. You can understand someone who's an Oscar-winning actor, probably has the means and resources, could have had hired help come in, but they wanted privacy, I'm assuming, and that's why she cared for him. But it just goes to show you the importance of community, which is the topic of our conversation today. And it doesn't matter how much money you have or how famous you are. You might die alone if you haven't built up a community to surround you and support you in these times of your elderly years and when you're not your healthiest.
And what was that Latin phrase that we talked about in a previous episode? Ars moriendi?
Yes.
That art of dying,
right,
which was based on art of living well, which was largely built in a low-resource environment around community, family, friends. Who are you journeying with that as you journey that last stage of life are part of your community? Going
back to that episode, 500 years ago, how people were just in community. We didn't have social media. We didn't have these ways to kind of connect by disconnecting. Really, I can be friends with someone across the globe, but I'm not actually friends with them. I'm not physically with them. But back 500 years ago, we were always physically together. So there's this concept now where we can be so socially connected, but so disconnected in the physical sense of it. And there's this term that you introduced me to, Dad, called unbefriended. What does that mean?
Well, as it would suggest is that, and again, we want to balance people's privacy and their decision making about who's in their inner circle, but you can take that to extreme, like that example you just gave with Gene Hackman and his deceased spouse, that you can be so disconnected that you're just off people's radar. And it can look like you're doing well just through the filters of social media, but if you don't really have an inner circle, you can get yourself painted into a corner that can be really difficult.
Yes, and I think part of the sobering aspect of this too, and I guess, I'm not privy, I haven't looked at the police record, as the journalist in me wants to make sure that we're clear. I don't know every aspect of the Hackman situation, but it does appear that she died before him, maybe even 2 weeks before him. And if they had additional people checking in on them, how maybe his life would have been spared if someone else could come in and help them. So this concept of unbefriending or kind of, pulling people out and becoming private, yes, we want to support people there are people who genuinely want to do that, but there is also this aspect of having a community who can be there in case something tragic like this happens. And there was a story about a man in, was it China?
Japan, actually. Yeah, who had lived in one of these high rises, and as he got older and was left mobile, people were not seeing him very often, and because he had all of his major utilities and accounts sort of linked to his bank account, they were just on auto pay. And it turned out that when those funds ran out, about a year and a half after he actually passed away, from what they can best tell, that he basically lived this hermit life. Nobody in his building of 1,000 people were even aware that he passed away. They just, we haven't seen that guy for a few years. So, yeah, I think at the extreme it can be an issue, but we see this in the news almost every day in our community here in the greater Phoenix area, where safety checks are done, right? I mean, police are sent out because they haven't heard from somebody for a day or two. So, yeah, this is a real issue that we want to address today.
Yeah, we do. Again, just to say that, some people may choose to live a more
private,
solitary lifestyle, and that's okay too. But I think if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have a family member that you love and want to support. And even if you're not physically in the same community as them, you want to make sure that they're being cared for. So we want to talk first about the importance of family, friends, and caregivers. And then we're going to transition to talk about some more practical things for people to have these conversations with their family members about what their wishes are when it comes to that. So, Dad, we talk a lot about community, and it's a big aspect in the church, in the book of Acts in the Bible. We talk about the importance of the church and community and supporting one another. But let's talk specifically end of life. What is important about a community? And I'm not talking about doctors. We talk a lot about doctors and pastors, but what about other people, family, coworkers, community? What's the importance of having those people around you then?
We've made it clear throughout this series that we're both Christ followers, and I think we know from the New Testament writings of the apostles that we were designed for relationships. We weren't designed to be all by ourselves. And in fact, most of the way we grow spiritually is not only with a good, solid connection with Jesus, but it's in community. We live out relationality through these relationships, some of which are hard, as we've talked about. And that is like the sandpaper in our life that helps mold us into the image that Jesus wants for us. So having people in our lives, both family and friends, if you will, those people that are going to be your pallbearers, maybe
metaphorically is the word.
Metaphorically. It's metaphysical, too, isn't it? I guess at some level.
That's a big word, yeah.
Yes. But really, who are those folks? And often you can, for a lot of us, can count them on one hand, maybe two hands, those people that you're doing life with. Mm-hmm. And for my wife and I, we've almost always been in a small group, home group, life group. It's called different things in different communities, church communities. But those are folks who kind of know what we're going through, pray for each other, sort of know what's going on with our families. So I think that's just a very important part of the way God's designed our lives here on earth.
Yeah, I agree. And I think just when you're just living life, no one's sick or anything, just you want a community of people around you. For my generation, I think people will struggle more with this than maybe with yours, because so often people feel isolated. You feel like they don't have good friends, feel like maybe their good friends are the ones from college or childhood that don't live in the same city. And really your biggest connection is the memes you send each other on Instagram or, the occasional FaceTime call. And people are, your extent, maybe your closest friends are the parents of your kids' friends. It's just, sometimes that happens. So there is a layer of, if you don't have a community, you need a community.
Yeah, and you even just think about what's happening in the workplace across multiple industries post-pandemic is a lot of folks are at best hybrid roles. Some are totally at home, often by themselves. I talked just yesterday to my former executive assistant in my last role, and her office is gone, and now she's full-time at home, and she has to make a reservation for a cubicle those days they ask her to come in. So we see that things even outside of our control are stripping away some of those social contexts that we experience some community.
Human connection, how important that is. And I keep going back to that episode we talk about 500 years ago, we did it better, right?
Exactly.
Where we actually connect with human beings, and now that's removed in many senses. So it's important to have people that you do life with. I have noticed that as people age, you can't get out as much. You might be in an assisted living situation where your friends change drastically because, it might be that you have this active friend group, but then you move to a new city to be closer to your family and they put you in assisted living, and now you have a new set of friends in your assisted living, or I don't know. I've never lived in assisted living, but it just seems like those friends that are around you during your healthy years, they might go away as you age, and that must be hard, I imagine.
Yeah, very hard. And I think a very vulnerable group is a widow or a widower. I mean, the statistics show, whether it's in the church or outside the church, that well over 2/3 of those, quote, friends sort of evaporate because that single person either doesn't feel to fit in with other couples, or the other couples are sort of awkward on how they relate. And so just life has a lot of headwind that can undo some of these important connections.
Well, and it says in the Bible to take care of our orphans and widows. So let this, if this is hitting close to home, like who's the lonely person in your life that you could enfold?
Yeah.
Right. So don't be thinking about your own community, but be thinking about how you can be a community to people who are vulnerable in your own life, in your own church, and in neighborhood, wherever that may be. Because we know that when times get hard, that's when the community shows up. So, my kids are in a theater group. Parent has cancer, and then, I'll sign up for the meal train, right? It's the families that surround you and do those kinds of things that, even though they might not be the closest friends, but you do have a community around you to help you during those hard times.
Absolutely. And that becomes very critical, not only for the one who perhaps is struggling with an illness, but even more importantly for the caregiver, that spouse who's trying to take care of him or herself, their loved one, trying to make meals. I mean, there's so many things we can get into that people can just come alongside and be a great help during these times of transition and stress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so talk to me a little bit about that. Then, the person who has died, let's say someone has passed away, and, we're talking about leaving a legacy. So you have left a legacy of a good community that can then come and support the person that's grieving. Next episode, we're going to talk about grieving. Mm-hmm. What are some practical ways that people can help them? We know meal train, GoFundMe, kind of those physical needs. But what about spiritually and emotionally?
I learned very early on in my clinical career, and it certainly played out over my life, is that there's some very predictable milestones for somebody who's lost a close loved one, whether it's a child or a spouse particularly. After the memorial service and the meal train dries up and the casserole dishes are empty and everybody's gone home to their own life, they may still be sorry that somebody died, but not like the spouse. That 2-week point out from the death is usually a real low point. Often the 6 to 8 week period out is a very predictable time, and this will be obvious, but usually the first birthdays or anniversaries, major holidays, are other pretty predictable, difficult times for folks. So I think as part of the community to be mindful of that and to try and find a way to connect or up your connection with those loved ones at those predictable low points.
Mm-hmm. And also, and this is, again, not everyone's going to be comfortable with this, but giving people a heads up on, hey, just so you know, I'm realizing I'm kind of down this week. This is actually the anniversary of my mom's death. Just to explain if I seem a little off or something, and giving your community a heads up to help you walk that as well.
Yeah, and I do think trying to keep that memory alive. I didn't even tell you this, Michelle. We can edit this out, but I sent my brother and sister a text this morning that said this: "This day in history, our mom and dad got married 75 years ago."
Today? 75 years
Yeah,
ago.
so I think some of us have to keep some of these, and they've been gone now 30 and 40 years, but just trying to keep some of these memories alive. That took me all of 10 seconds to write that text, and they both really appreciated it.
So now I want to hear, we talked about this before. What was that story about the great-grandparents?
Yeah, a friend of mine in facilitating a lecture, and I've heard him do this a couple times. I think it's wonderful. Close your eyes and see if you can name the first name of your 4 grandparents. Who were they? Mary, John, Steve?
Arnold, Doris, Elizabeth, Marvin.
Good. So those, exactly. Now, can you also name their parents, either first or last name, those 8 people? Could you name those without going to the family Bible and looking it up?
Your dad's mom was Mary.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know your dad's name.
Yeah.
No, I couldn't.
Well, the sad punchline here is you see that in 2 generations you're forgotten.
Oh, so sad.
And it's true. And not that we're all about building a legacy that, is all about me, but whatever memory 2 or 3 generations have from now, wouldn't you like it to be a sweet one?
Right. And we're not saying that you have to change the world and go down in history, but just too, it kind of puts in perspective as well. Don't get so caught up in yourself, and build the community around you, and really live your dash. Live your dash well. Yes. That dash between your birth date and your death date, to really live that well, and to focus not only on the loved ones who will carry your name for a few years, but also the community around you to really build them up.
Yeah.
We talk about this community, and again, I think this is one of those topics that people kind of know. This isn't necessarily new information. So we really, Dad and I wanted to really kind of help you, our listeners, think about how this concept, you can use it in discussions with your parents, other family members, to facilitate that end of life, dying well concept. Not everybody lives in the same city. Dad and I, we live in the same city, no plans on moving at this point. So whenever you need to transition to a different living situation, and presumably we'll be around, and be able to, we'll be nearby. But if for some reason Jason and I move to another state, do you want to stay here? Do you want to move to be closer to us? And those kind of discussions, I want to get into that, because that breaks community, right? So if I'm taking my 80-year-old plus parents and I'm moving them from where they've lived the last 30 years to a new place, they're leaving behind their entire community. Is that worth it? Is that your wish? What about you, Dad? We haven't talked about that.
Well, it's a great point, and it's one of the other things that as we are in this now modern world, we're highly mobile, and often families are either different parts of the country, even sometimes the world. Sometimes the more affluent folks can have multiple homes, perhaps a vacation home, or they split their time between different climates. Not what we saw a couple hundred years ago, where, you'd have 3, sometimes 4 generations living on the same homestead, if you will. So, yeah, I think for me personally, as much as I love you, if you moved across the country, our community is here, and we'd want to stay here. Now, when Mom or I die, that calculus might change, and it depends on how long one of us lives, that we may become increasingly frail, and we may outlive our support system locally.
Right. So
you got to think about that too. And another part of it is perhaps, hopefully, our cognitive abilities will maintain on into our, God gives us in another 10 or 15 years. But anything that's disruptive, particularly folks who are cognitively impaired, that sort of change is really difficult for folks, even moving from one nursing home to another. So, I'd personally like to stay in Arizona. Hope you guys are here, but if you're not, come visit us.
Okay. I learned something new. And now I feel like this is very selfish, but I would have assumed that you just want to be with me. that you would want to go, if you guys were getting elderly and you needed to be in assisted care, you would want to be near me and your grandkids. And so if we had relocated to, Florida, that you would just be like, yeah, we'll pick up and move there. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because now I know you'd want to be here, and, we could adjust our schedules to accommodate that. And
Well, everybody's different. I mean, when you were a baby, I changed your diapers. I just can't get my head around you changing my diapers. I'm sorry.
So you don't want me to change your diapers?
Please.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm very glad we had this conversation. Okay, so talking to your parents, your loved ones, your grandparents about where do they want to be? Is it more important that they're close to their friends and their community? Is it more important that they're near their family? There's not a wrong answer. It is their decision, and honoring that, because that, had I not asked you that question in this moment, in this podcast bay, Dad, I would not have known. I would have assumed incorrectly. We probably we're not planning on leaving Arizona. So it's kind of nice to be in the same city, but most families aren't. So have that conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, again, thematic of what we're trying to communicate is we all live our life with some assumptions, and often they're incorrect assumptions. So take a chance, ask, test a hypothesis, see if it's real or not.
Yeah.
And I think we all grow from that, Michelle.
Yeah, I agree. Now, you brought up the issue of privacy. You don't want me to change your diapers. Appreciate you saying that. I would if I needed to, but
thank you.
Yeah, we can outsource that. But talking about privacy, and even people who are sick or unhealthy, some people have different opinions about who they even want to know that they're sick. Some people just want to be sick in private and not talk to anyone about that, and they pass away and it's kind of a surprise. Other people want an open door policy. They want people to know and come in and talk to them. So talk to me about that. And in your clinical experience too, have you witnessed both sides of that?
Yeah, very much so. And again, it's a personal choice, but one that should be thought through. And again, it's going to leave a consequence. So if you felt you were close to somebody and they end up dying and you weren't brought in that awareness, that can be a sobering reality sometimes, right? And we'll talk about it more next episode around grief. But, the reality is even if you're a real extrovert and you have a large, quote, community, that shrinks over time as you get older, as you outlive people, as you get sick, and your world starts to shrink as far as, doctor appointments and grocery stores. You're not traveling long distances. So, we want to always sort of be aware that not only people's privacy plays into this, but just the world starts to shrink down.
Yeah. So talking about community, it's what we were talking about earlier. Like even you could have like me, like social butterfly. Like I can't go anywhere, and I always see someone I know somewhere. I love people, but as you age, that diminishes, and then also it's hard to talk to someone who's sick or dying, and that kind of gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So knowing who's around you, expressing to those people that you want them around you. Is really important, and to not be quiet about that.
So true.
You, unfortunately, or I don't know if it's, talk about unfortunately, someone passed away. It's unfortunate, but the light of these conversations that we're having, I think we should remove unfortunately from that sense. It's not always unfortunate.
It's a promotion.
It is a promotion. And you had a friend who passed away recently, and you went to his memorial service, and we wanted to talk about his community, because you really saw a good example of how to have a community around you in that time.
It was a very precious memorial for somebody who'd spent their career as a clergyman, a pastor. And it was beautiful to see, after a long journey with a fatal disease, just him being honored. One of the things that struck me, Michelle, that I think is a little bit humbling for me, there was little or no discussion about his educational pedigree, where he got this degree or that degree. And, as a physician, you're always sort of thinking about your title and all of that. Mm-hmm. So I was really struck by the legacy he left, by the testimonials over almost 2 hours of people getting up and talking about what he meant to them at certain strategic points of their life. And this was over the arc of 40 plus years of ministry. We had people from around the country talking about their time with him at various stages. So it, to me, was humbling to see it done not only well, but sort of very well.
Yeah. 2 hours.
Yes.
Wow.
And my wife and I said, it went by. It wasn't like we were squirming.
Right. Right. And just how he purposefully poured into people and really built that community. And then, it doesn't matter how much money he made or what his degrees were. It was that leaving behind a legacy of love and a good example and building up your community.
I thought it was very much him and his family that we were asked when we came if we had a slightly used pair of shoes or gym shoes to bring them, because they had started a homeless ministry here in Phoenix, and that was really what the people needed that they had been serving the last few years. So there were several large piles of shoes.
Ugh, what a beautiful, and just a picture of leaving empty shoes behind, but they're going to be filled by people in the community, and how beautiful. I love that. And I'm not going to get into the details of it. Around the same time, I went to a funeral service of someone I didn't know, and and this is not a person of faith, and there was more recognized for the team the NFL team he cheered for than he was the people he impacted. And I went in a supportive role for someone else who knew the family, but it was just so interesting talking how we've been having these conversations in the podcast and stuff, and then talking how we both went to these two services and just the difference in the importance of really pouring into people versus living a more selfish, self-centered life, and how that really does affect the legacy that your children see and the people around you, and how beautiful it is to see someone who really poured themselves into other people and the community around them coming to support them. I love that. All right, well, presence. Real intentional presence. This is one of the greatest gifts that we can give someone nearing the end of their life, and our family members, whether it's just listening to them and supporting what their wishes are at the end, running an errand, sending a note, offering a prayer. Communities can become the hands and feet of comfort in those sacred moments. And let's not forget caregivers. And you're not going to let me be your caregiver, Dad. That's okay.
You're be a caregiver.
A caregiver.
But we'll lean on your skill set.
You know me so well.
My video.
That's all I'm allowed to do. But don't forget the caregivers, especially like the spouse, like Dad was saying earlier, the widower who's left behind, in these moments. So you really want to be aware of the people in your community, that you have a community built up around you, and that you are looking to be the community for people who are in need and where you can help them.
Even with a great community surrounding us, loss still cuts deep. In our next episode, we're going to talk about grief, how it hits us emotionally, physically, and spiritually, and how biblical lament can help us hold on to both honesty and hope. It will be a tender but needed conversation.
And I'll be honest, bring a tissue, because these conversations are not easy, and we'll be talking about anticipatory grief, which I did not realize had a name, and wow, tears. Well, it's such a blessing for me to have these conversations with my precious dad and to have you all listening in. I wish you could all have a candid conversation with your loved one about these topics. And actually, that's the whole reason we're doing this. If there's someone on your mind as you're listening, send them the link to this podcast and let this be a catalyst for you to have a conversation before the buzzer.